I still remember the exact moment the weight left my shoulders, though I did not realize it was there until it was gone. It was a warm, incredibly quiet Sunday afternoon in Munich, about 6 months after I packed my entire life into 2 suitcases and left Ohio. I was sitting on a wooden bench in a public park, watching a group of elderly people play chess on a giant painted board on the concrete. Parents were sitting nearby, reading books, while their toddlers wandered 20 yards away, completely unsupervised, chasing ducks by the water. There were no sirens, no roaring highway noise, and no security guards. It was just quiet. In that moment, a strange physical sensation washed over me, a feeling of deep, uncomplicated safety that I had never experienced in my 30 years of living in the United States. My chest felt lighter, my shoulders dropped. My mind, which has spent 3 decades constantly scanning public spaces for exits and keeping a low-grade tally of potential threats, finally went silent. It felt exactly like waking up from a long, exhausting dream that I did not even know I was having. When you grow up in America, you are conditioned to believe that life is a competitive sport and survival is the ultimate prize. We are taught that the constant hustle, the baseline anxiety, and the financial tightrope we walk every single day are just the natural price of admission for living in the greatest country on earth. We call it freedom, but we rarely stop to ask what we are actually free from. It was only after living in Germany for over 5 years, observing life here and in neighboring countries like France, Denmark, and even places further away like New Zealand, that I started to see the invisible cage we are taught to accept as normal. I love the American people, and I love the warmth, the optimism, and the boundless creativity of the culture I grew up in. But after seeing life from the outside, I am constantly shocked by how much stress, debt, and fear ordinary Americans are forced to carry just to exist. Back in Ohio, my life was defined by a quiet, persistent hypervigilance. I thought everyone lived that way. I thought it was normal to feel a tiny spike of adrenaline every time you walk through a dark parking lot, or to mentally map out the exits when you enter a movie theater or a crowded grocery store. I thought it was normal to have your stomach drop when you see a medical bill, even when you have good health insurance, because you know a single administrative error could cost you thousands of dollars. We are trained to be resilient, to be tough, and to grind through the pain. We wear our exhaustion like a badge of honor. If you are working 60 hours a week and barely keeping your head above water, you are celebrated as a hard worker. But when you step outside of that bubble, you realize that there is a massive difference between surviving and actually living. To understand how we got to a point where survival is sold as liberty, we have to look at the structures that keep Americans in a state of perpetual panic. It is not an accident of history. It is the result of deliberate choices, legal frameworks, and a cultural narrative that has elevated hyper-independence to the level of a state religion. Quick transition before we unpack the historical reason why your job holds your health hostage. The data on this channel shows that over 80% of you watching right now are actually not subscribed. That means you are showing up for the story, but the algorithm has no reason to recommend the next video to you. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Also, this is exactly the kind of thing I go much deeper on with the people who support this channel directly. So if you are sitting there thinking, okay, I need the fuller version of this story, join the membership below. That is where I share the deeper thoughts, the more personal side of all this, and the extra bits I cannot always fit into the main videos. To truly understand why leaving America feels like waking up, you have to look at the single greatest source of low-grade terror for the average American, which is the healthcare system. In Europe, Canada, or Australia, if you get sick, you go to the doctor. You show a card, you get treated, and you go home. You might pay a small copay, but you do not leave with a debt that will take you 10 years to pay off. In America, getting sick is a financial gamble. Even if you have a great corporate job with premium insurance, you are constantly negotiating a maze of deductibles, copays, out-of-network premiums, and prior authorizations. This anxiety is so deeply baked into the American psyche that we do not even notice it. But when you move abroad, the realization that a broken leg or an emergency appendectomy will not ruin your credit score is nothing short of revolutionary. It completely changes your relationship with your own body. You stop viewing every physical ailment as a potential bankruptcy filing. How did we end up with a system where health is a luxury tied directly to your employment status? To find the answer, we have to go back to 1942. During World War II, the United States government was terrified of runaway inflation caused by a severe shortage of workers and a booming wartime economy. To prevent companies from bidding up wages to steal employees from one another, the Roosevelt administration passed the Stabilization Act of 1942, which froze wages across the country. Employers were suddenly desperate for a way to attract talent, but they legally could not offer more money. They looked for a loophole and they found one in employee benefits. The government allowed companies to offer health insurance as a non-wage perk, and crucially, these benefits were not subject to the wage cap. A few years later, in 1954, the Internal Revenue Service codified this by making employer-sponsored health insurance completely tax-free for both companies and employees. Just like that, an accidental, temporary wartime inflation control became the permanent foundation of the American healthcare system. The consequences of this historical accident are devastating. By tying health insurance to employment, the United States built a system that essentially holds workers hostage. If you hate your job, if your boss is abusive, or if the work is destroying your mental health, you cannot easily walk away, because walking away means risking your family's medical safety. It creates a culture of compliance. It forces people to tolerate exploitation because the alternative is losing their insulin, their chemotherapy, or their child's asthma medication. When you live in Germany, you discover a completely different reality. Here, healthcare is a fundamental right managed through a public, highly regulated system of social insurance. If you lose your job, your healthcare does not vanish. If you want to start a business, go back to school, or take a year off to raise your child, you are still covered. The peace of mind this simple structural safety net provides is immeasurable. It allows people to take creative risks, to change careers, and to live without the constant, suffocating fear of the unexpected. This difference in security extends directly into how we view work and rest. In the United States, we are conditioned to believe that our self-worth is entirely tied to our productivity. We are told that if we are not constantly striving, building, and optimizing, we are failing. This hustle culture is a direct product of a system that offers absolutely no baseline safety net. When you have no guaranteed sick leave, no mandated vacation, and no protection against arbitrary termination, you have to run as fast as you can just to stay in place. I remember my first job in Germany. After a few months, my manager walked over to my desk and looked at our internal scheduling system. She pointed at the screen and told me that I had 25 days of unused vacation left and that the year was coming to an end. She was genuinely concerned. She told me that if I did not schedule my time off soon, the company would face regulatory issues and, more importantly, I would burn out. She literally ordered me to take 3 weeks off. I went back to my apartment and sat on my couch, feeling a bizarre mixture of relief and guilt. In America, taking vacation is often accompanied by an overwhelming sense of anxiety. You worry about the mountain of work that will pile up while you are gone. You worry that your colleagues will think you are lazy or that your boss will realize they can function without you. You check your email from the beach and you apologize for being unreachable. In Germany, rest is protected by federal law. The Bundesurlaubsgesetz, passed in 1963, mandates a minimum of 20 paid vacation days for anyone working a standard 5-day week, and 24 days for those on a 6-day week. In practice, almost every company offers between 25 and 30 days of paid leave. That is 6 full weeks of paid time off, guaranteed by law. And when you take that vacation, your work email is shut down. Your out-of-office reply does not apologize for your absence. It simply states when you will return and directs queries to a colleague. It is a cultural boundary that is treated with absolute respect. If you are loving this honest exploration of how our lives change when we look at them from a new angle, please take a quick second to hype up this video in the comments and hit that like button. Sharing your support and hyping up this journey helps this channel immensely, and I appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to show some love. When you combine 6 weeks of paid vacation with unlimited, fully paid sick leave, the entire atmosphere of a society changes. In Germany, if you get a cold, you do not drag yourself into the office to prove your loyalty while infecting your coworkers. You stay home. Your doctor writes a simple note called an Arbeitsunfähigkeitsbescheinigung, which you email to your employer, and you get paid your full salary while you rest and recover. This system is built on a fundamental understanding that humans are not machines. It recognizes that rest is not a reward for hard work, but a prerequisite for a healthy, functioning society. When you live in an environment where your basic humanity is respected, the frantic, desperate energy of the hustle culture simply evaporates. You stop measuring your days by how much capital you produced, and you start measuring them by the quality of your relationships, the books you read, and the walks you took. This shift in energy is also visible in the physical landscape of our cities. One of the most exhausting things about living in suburban America is the absolute car dependency. In most American towns and suburbs, the built environment is designed for automobiles, not human beings. You cannot buy a gallon of milk, visit a friend, or go to a park without climbing into a 2-ton metal box and navigating lanes of asphalt. This car dependency is a massive hidden tax on the American middle class. According to data from transit and financial agencies, the average cost of owning, insuring, fueling, and maintaining a car in the United States is now close to $10,000 a year. If you are a household with two working adults, you likely need two cars. That is $20,000 of after-tax income spent simply on the logistics of survival. It is a massive financial burden that we accept as a natural part of life. But the cost of car dependency is not just financial. It is also deeply psychological. Spending 2 hours a day trapped in gridlock traffic, surrounded by concrete, asphalt, and aggressive drivers, is a recipe for chronic stress. It isolates us. It turns our daily commutes into a series of minor battles where every other human being on the road is an obstacle in our path. It destroys our sense of community and replaces it with a landscape of strip malls, drive-thrus, and endless parking lots. When I moved to Germany, I sold my car. I have not owned one since. On a typical day, I walk to my local bakery for fresh bread in the morning. I take the subway to work, reading a book or listening to music while the train glides quietly underground. If I need groceries, I walk to the supermarket down the street, carrying my food home in reusable bags. If I want to travel to another city, I board a high-speed train, buy a coffee, and watch the countryside roll by at 150 miles an hour. This walkability completely changes your relationship with your environment. It turns the simple act of moving through the world into a source of connection rather than stress. You see your neighbors, you pass local shops, you watch the seasons change in the trees lining the sidewalk. Public transit is not viewed as a symbol of poverty as it so often is in the United States. It is viewed as a highly efficient public utility used by everyone, from students to corporate executives. It is clean, safe, and reliable. Living in a walkable society also fosters a level of social trust that is vanishingly rare in modern America. In Germany, children as young as 6 or 7 years old routinely walk or ride their bikes to school alone. They navigate the public transit system, walk through parks, and run errands for their parents without a second thought. The first time I saw a group of primary school children wearing bright yellow safety vests navigating the Munich subway system without an adult, I was absolutely terrified. My American brain immediately screamed that this was dangerous, that something terrible was about to happen. But as I watched them laugh, joke, and find their seats, I realized that my fear was a product of a culture of anxiety. In Germany, the safety of children is seen as a collective responsibility. There is a shared understanding that the public square belongs to everyone, and that we all have a duty to keep it safe, clean, and accessible. This high level of social trust is incredibly liberating. It means you can walk through almost any neighborhood at midnight without looking over your shoulder. It means you do not need to build high fences around your yard, install security cameras at every entrance, or view every stranger with suspicion. When you live without that constant, low-level fear, you realize how much cognitive space it was consuming. You stop living in a state of defense. Your world expands, and you start to see other people not as potential threats, but as fellow citizens sharing a common space. Of course, when you discuss these differences with Americans who have never lived abroad, you often run into a wall of skepticism and defensive counter-arguments. The most common objection is always about taxes. People will say that European countries have incredibly high income taxes, and that you lose half of your paycheck to the state. They will tell you that the American system allows you to keep more of your hard-earned money, and that you have the freedom to spend it how you choose. But this argument is based on a massive, fundamental misunderstanding of what taxes actually are. It is true that my income tax rate in Germany is higher than it was in Ohio, but when I look at my paycheck, I have to look at what those taxes actually buy. In Germany, my taxes pay for universal healthcare. They pay for world-class public schools, clean and safe public transit, affordable high-speed rail, and public parks that are maintained like gardens. My taxes pay for subsidized university education, meaning that young people can graduate without $100,000 of debt hanging over their heads. My taxes pay for parental leave, subsidized childcare, and a robust social safety net that ensures no one is left to freeze on the street if they fall on hard times. In the United States, your taxes might be lower, but you are forced to pay for all of these basic services out of your own pocket, with after-tax dollars. You pay thousands of dollars a year for health insurance premiums, deductibles, and copays. You pay for private preschool, which can easily cost as much as a university tuition. You pay for car payments, insurance, and maintenance because you have no public transit option. You save obsessively for your children's college funds, and you pray that you do not lose your job and face financial ruin. When you add up the true cost of survival in America, the myth of the low tax paradise quickly falls apart. You are not keeping more of your money, you are simply paying a private corporate tax for services that every other developed nation provides as a basic human right. And unlike public taxes, which are subject to democratic oversight, these private corporate fees are designed to extract maximum profit while providing the bare minimum of service. This brings us to the core of the issue, which is how we define freedom. In the American narrative, freedom is almost always defined in the negative. It is freedom from government interference. It is the freedom to choose between 47 different brands of cereal, 30 different private health insurance plans, and 50 different types of SUVs. It is the freedom to succeed wildly, but also the freedom to fail catastrophically with no one to catch you. It is a highly individualistic, atomized version of liberty, where every person is an island, solely responsible for their own fate. But there is another, much more humane definition of freedom, which is freedom from fear. It is the freedom of knowing that if you get sick, you will not lose your home. It is the freedom of knowing that your children can walk to the local bakery safely, without you worrying about their survival. It is the freedom of knowing that if you lose your job, you will have a dignified safety net to support you while you transition to your next step. It is the freedom to take a month off to rest, to clear your mind, and to spend time with the people you love without risking your career. When you experience this positive freedom, you realize that the hyper-individualism of American culture is not actually liberty. It is a form of survivalism. It is a system that forces you to be strong, to be tough, and to be self-reliant because the alternative is so utterly terrifying. It is a culture that has mistaken the resilience required to survive a harsh environment for the freedom to enjoy a peaceful life. Leaving America does not mean you stop loving your home. I love my family in Ohio. I miss the endless summer nights, the smell of backyard barbecues, and the easy, friendly conversations with strangers at the grocery store. I miss the boundless optimism that makes Americans believe they can change the world. But living abroad has taught me that we have been lied to. We have been told that a stressful, expensive, and hyper-competitive life is the only way to build a successful society. We have been trained to defend the very systems that exhaust us because we have been convinced that any alternative is a threat to our freedom. When you leave that bubble, the illusion vanishes. You realize that it is possible to build a society where the economy serves the people rather than the people serving the economy. You realize that a country's greatness should not be measured by its number of billionaires, but by how it treats its most vulnerable citizens. You realize that you do not have to live in a state of constant, low-grade survival just to prove you are worthy of existing. That is the true feeling of waking up. It is the sudden, beautiful realization that a peaceful, secure, and dignified life is not a radical dream. It is simply how life is supposed to be.